So yes, a bit of a departure from my day job, which is running data centers and clouds and so forth. So blockchain, it all really starts with Bitcoin. Bitcoin came around, I'm sure you've all heard of it, in about 2009. And it's very disruptive, very innovative, and for my part, I became interested in it in about 2010, and I bought about $50 worth, much to the amusement of my brother. He thought it was a complete waste of money. I became really interested in Bitcoin when in 2013, which is the first spike in value you see there, suddenly about $50 was worth about $1,000. I thought, there might be something here. So I got a bit involved in the community. I started a crypto coin mining business. I raised a whole bunch of money on a slightly dubious crypto securities exchange. And within a matter of months, I had a company that was worth over $1 million. And then a matter of months after that, it had all imploded. But what that taught me, what that experience taught me, is not only that the people that make the money in a gold rush, in any gold rush, are the people selling the shovels, not doing mining. But also that the real value of Bitcoin doesn't lie in its $10 billion market valuation and its very valuable and enormously disruptive impact on the world of economics, but in the underlying technology, the blockchain. So what is the blockchain anyway? First of all, a bit about the hype. There's a lot of hype about blockchain. Some of it may not be deserved. There are a lot of sort of money chasing blockchain. There's a lot of startups that have gone boom, a lot of question marks. I personally believe, though, that some of the hype is deserved because I believe that blockchain with open source will enable a new paradigm of fully distributed IT. And I'm going to try and just describe that to you over the next few slides. But first of all, we'll start with a bit about what actually blockchain is, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. Fundamentally, it's a public ledger. So with the Bitcoin example, I send you some money, you send me some crypto coins, crypto coins. Those transactions are all stored in a public, immutable ledger that can only ever be added to. It can't be altered. So that in of itself is quite valuable. The blockchain is also stored on thousands of nodes, and this applies to individual blockchains or public blockchains, thousands of nodes all around the world. Some of those can be wallets, some are exchanges, some are just volunteers providing resource, and it relies on a peer consensus among those nodes to validate that transactions have actually happened. And one of the really interesting things about it is that it's a Byzantine fault-tolerant system. So that means it's not just tolerant against stuff randomly failing when the machines go a bit wonky. It's tolerant against deliberate malicious attack by one of the nodes. So one of the nodes trying to actively deceive you into thinking that, actually you sent me a bunch of money that you never did. And it's one of the world's first large-scale examples of that sort of system. Other examples of that sort of system are some airline software uses it. I think the next shuttle was supposed to use it as well, the next space shuttle. And in that sense, it's also a little bit like the open source community, which also relies on a peer consensus amongst people in order to achieve validity. In terms of the blocks, every 10 minutes, again using the Bitcoin example, transactions are packaged up into a block. Each block has to refer to its predecessor in order to be valid. And that goes all the way back to the very first block. And this gives you a chain, hence blockchain, and a structure that prevents anyone from tampering with it, and the ability to check the validity of all the transactions. And allows you to permanently store information. Although there is no central authority or individual body maintaining the security of the blockchain, it is inherently secure because of this structure, because it's completely safe from tampering. There are vulnerabilities, it's not impervious. There's things called 51% attacks, which I won't go into today, but they are very rare for any mature blockchain. And there's a huge number of applications, even just taking the finance examples. The biggest thing is it gets rid of the middleman. So, no longer do we need the bank as the intermediary if we want to send money to each other. We can do it directly via the distributed network. There's some really interesting things like provenance of diamonds with Everledger. So that allows you to track a diamond from its origin, a capitalist system in some ways. And that work does continue. It's not a panacea though, it's not good for everything. It's inherently shared generally, there are private ones, I'll come on to that. You don't always want to share your information. It's not good for storing large amounts of information. Just as you wouldn't stick an image in your database, you wouldn't want to stick some chunky bit of information in the blockchain, you get blockchain bloat. And actually that's one of Bitcoin's weaknesses. Its blockchain is now over 100 gigabytes. It means you can't really put it on a phone or a laptop sensibly anymore. And actually the number of nodes is shrinking in the network as a result. Also, it's not for very rapid transactions. Typically, consensus amongst nodes, depending on the blockchain, takes of the order of a minute. So if you want to do very fast transactions, it's not necessarily the right thing. Like with cloud, there are flavors of blockchain emerging. I would always advocate that, as a purist, the public versions are the best ones. That's where you get the real power of the distribution of the decentralized nature of it. Private blockchains, things like Hyperledger, IBM are working on, which is open source still. And it does make sense for some things, like say a collection of banks. They want to have a shared blockchain amongst them, so they can do private transactions. And sometimes there's something that's in the middle. You want to have the power of a public blockchain, but there's some information that you want to keep private. So yeah, there's a few flavors. There's a huge amount of interesting blockchain technology at the moment, which I don't have time to talk about this morning, but I have a longer talk tomorrow that I'm going to talk about. Smart contracts, that's basically taking business logic and putting it into the blockchain. Access control, a good example of this is the NHS. So a bunch of dispersed data stores. Your data is probably partly your GP, partly your hospital, partly the hospital you were born. You might want to be able to specify that certain individuals or organisations have access to certain bits of that information, and also to be able to track who has changed what and who has accessed what. A blockchain, a public blockchain, is absolutely ideal for that. It can be obfuscated and encrypted the data such that nobody else can see who has access to what, but we as citizens could have power over it. Distributed file systems, that's basically about taking the unused storage on home PCs and offices and data centers and liberating it and monetizing it and achieving the same levels or better of resilience and availability that we see in typical cloud storage systems at a tiny fraction of the price, like a fifth or a tenth of what Amazon S3 costs. Distributed computing is perhaps the most interesting of all, and I'm going to talk about Ethereum a lot tomorrow. Ethereum is the world's first global distributed singleton computer, which is pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. It has a number of really amazing inherent properties as well. It's fully object-oriented, so you stick your code on there, it's all object-oriented code. It provides full atomicity, so the operations either run or they don't. There's no nasty halfway house failures. You get full provenance built in, so whenever there's a method call, you can actually track exactly where that method call came from all the way through the code. You get object immortality, which is a slightly odd concept, unless an object explicitly self-destructs. No team can come along and no sysadmin can log in as root and delete it. And likewise, immutability, nobody can change the data. So, where do I think open source comes into this? I personally believe open source has still somewhat yet to have its day, but that day is upon us. The interest in open source is rising exponentially, and as we've just been hearing from Liam Maxwell, particularly amongst the most conservative users, amongst government users. Likewise, blockchain is rapidly gaining momentum. I believe that open source and blockchain are kindred spirits and can potentially be allies or our natural allies in the fight for a more liberal and meritocratic world of IT. This is my attempt to sort of describe a bit of a sort of brief history of IT in this context. So along the top we see the evolution of open source. It's nearly as old as I am. No, it's older than I am. No, nearly as old as I am. I think it's only really since the advent of Git, Linus Torvalds doing his thing again, and Stallman, great guy too. That was a seismic shift from the bazaar model to the clones and forks model. So that's much more decentralized in terms of the progression towards a much more decentralized approach to software. At the same time, we've seen waves of centralization and decentralization of IT more generally. I mean, if you go back to before I was born, in the 1970s, my dad ran a computer bureau. His company owns a large centralized compute resource. At the time, it had 14K of RAM, punch cards, and they rented it out in short time frames to run payroll mostly for other companies. Since then, there's been a number of waves of insourcing and outsourcing. And now, cloud, although we think of it as fluffy and out there, actually it's just the latest wave of massive centralization of IT. And basically, I today do the same thing as my dad. I run a large centralized IT resource, data center full of servers, and I rent it out in short time frames to other companies in the form of VMs. However, I think we're now at a bit of a tipping point, a bit of a perfect storm, because this latest wave of centralization is different. It's a remote centralization. So it's not local in people's offices and data centers. It is in the cloud. We have a massively interconnected world. I think back in 2010, more than 2/3 of people in the developed world were connected to the internet, and that's just continues to rise. So we've got massive interconnectivity. We've got Internet of Things around the corner. Open source adoption is becoming widespread. It's finally been taken seriously and used properly. And now we have blockchain as well. And I believe that with blockchain and open source and these other facets, we can actually usher in a new paradigm of fully distributed software, logic, and IT resources. And that's why I think you should all be very excited about blockchain and should be starting to learn how to write distributed apps or DApps. Thank you very much.